Hi there guys, and welcome to another episode of the Cover Zero Show with me, your host Simon Conboy, doing another episode of the quarterback Quandaries series today. If you've not seen this episode before, I basically pick a franchise that has no long-term answer at the quarterback position at this point in time, discuss the guys that are currently on the roster, how I expect them to go into the 2017 season with those guys, and what they may be looking to do for the long term. This episode will be focusing on one of the teams with the biggest question mark for both the short and the long term at the quarterback spot, the New York Jets. So looking at the current quarterback room for the Jets, I expect they'll carry three guys into the regular season, and you're looking at Josh McCown, Bryce Petty and Christian Hackenberg. Now, this on paper looks like as weak a quarterback room as there is in the league. McCown has been able to put together some decent starts in his time in the league, but for the most part has been on some horrible teams, and as a result has a pretty terrible win-loss record. A fairly average skill set. There's a lot of experience at this point, but at this point, you know what you're going to get from him. Not a huge amount of upside there. We saw a little bit of Bryce Petty last year. I thought he did not look ready. Gave him a little bit in the run game. Not much else. Doesn't look like he's comfortable within that scheme yet, or with the general speed of the NFL game at this point. I don't know if he's necessarily got the arm talent you look for going forward. So I think he needs to be looked at as a option, possibly a long-term backup. I don't think that he's shown enough to think he's the potential quarterback of the future. Now, the real wild card, of course, is Christian Hackenberg. I have to be concerned, of course, that he was not on the 53-man game day roster last season for the most part, despite being a second-round pick. Of course, had an underwhelming college career considering his talent level, and that is a real warning to me that mentally I would suspect he's not grasped the NFL game at all, or the sport at this level, and hence not even throwing him out there in what was very much a lost season for New York. You would think, with the QB carousel in full swing last year for the Jets, that a second round draft pick in particular, in last 4 or 5 games of the season, it would be worth just throwing him out there and getting an idea what you've got. Of course, that didn't happen. In terms of the skill set, he does certainly have the most upside of the guys on that roster. He does have a big arm. He's a big kid, looks like a stereotypical NFL pocket passer. I think this year he absolutely has to see the field. Otherwise, the Jets may as well just cut their losses. As much as you hear a lot of critique these days that teams do not give quarterbacks enough of an opportunity to develop. If you're at a point where you do not feel comfortable putting this guy on the field over the course of 2 seasons with his physical skill set, that doesn't bode well for me for the long term. That just would suggest to me that he's never going to get it. So I think he's the toughest judge at this point, due to us simply having not seen him playing at this level. In terms of who's going to be the starter next year, you would have to expect it's going to be McCown. He's the only guy there with any experience. As much as this team's in a rebuild, it does feel like the front office is on a very short leash, so they're going to have to try and get some wins from somewhere. I think even if they get to like 7-8 wins, that might even be good enough to save Todd Bowles and co.'s jobs. Whether they decide to stick with him through the rebuild, who knows. McCown, of course, it would appear gives them by far the best chance to win. I feel like Petty should only be given a chance if that fails horrifically and you just need to see something else, because I really have very little confidence in Bryce Petty as a long-term option. And I feel when the season is over, which will probably be around mid-season, looking at this Jets roster at this point in time, Hackenberg has to see the field. He just has to. Otherwise, you may as well cut him. There's no point having the guy on the roster if you're not willing to see what he's got, especially after, as I said earlier, the investment of a second-round draft pick. So that would be my advice. Have Petty as the third quarterback. If he shows enough, maybe have him going in as the number 2 early on in the season. When this season inevitably goes down the tube, I think you stick Hackenberg out there. Of course, in terms of the current free agency market, I don't think there's anyone worth bringing in. I mean, you've got Kaepernick out there, you've got RG3. Neither one of those feels like they would add anything to this roster. I don't think they're going to be winning any games in New York. It would just be muddying the situation even further. So that's how I feel things have to go. Just run McCown out there, see what you've got in the other 2 guys when it inevitably, it feels like it inevitably doesn't work out this year for the Jets. So then, of course, hardly a rocket scientist for this suggestion. They're going to have to look to next year for their quarterback. I think the Jets have as good a chance as anyone, in spite of some of the defensive talent they've got, of ending up with the top overall pick next year. If I had to say today, they would probably be my favourites to obtain that spot. With that being the case, you'd have to think that at this point in time, Sam Darnold is likely going to be the favourite quarterback to be taken. Of course, we do have a full season to play in college before we have an idea as to how teams feel about these QBs, but Darnold looks the most ready to play in the NFL at this point in time. Of course, you've got the kid from Wyoming and the kid from Cal, respectively, who are also being currently considered in that kind of vein as in the running for the first QB to be taken next year. With Darnold, I think you see really good ability to throw on the run, which I think is essential in today's league. Got to have some ability to throw whilst on the move. ALA Aaron Rodgers, although no one does it quite as well as him. You see good touch and some anticipation, which is not necessarily something you see a lot from college QB. So I think his game looks, based on last year's tape, like it would translate best to the NFL. I think he'd be a perfect fit for New York if they do indeed get that first overall pick. Either of the other 2 kids could be options. Of course, you've got Lamar Jackson as well, who knows where he could end up going. I think he's a wild card, but with another very, very productive season, I think he could certainly be in the mix in terms of being a top 10 quarterback. So I think, personally, I don't feel this team should take a QB next year unless one of these guys does separate themselves and they have a shot at him in terms of being as close to surefire a prospect as you can get. I don't think if they're in a situation rather like last year's draft or this year's draft where the QB position looks very dubious, this is a team that I don't think should just take a flyer. This team's got a ton of holes on the roster. I feel it's inevitable when in all likelihood this season goes downhill, that this team does start looking ahead to next year's draft and will take one of those guys. I would be utterly shocked if not. But I do think that it's, even if it is Sam Darnold and he goes on to have a wonderful season, I think it's going to be really difficult for that quarterback to have immediate success. This offense is as lacking in talent as any in the league at this point in time. The offensive line needs a ton of work. Matt Forte is a good player, but at this point he's aging, and I don't know how much productivity you get out of him next season, let alone this season. So that's tough. They've not got much at wide receiver. I mean, Quincy Enunwa showed some flashes last year, but that's really about it. So I think, personally, this team needs to look very long term. I think actually next year, unless they've got a can't-miss quarterback at the spot they happen to have in the draft, I do not think they should look for the QB next year. I really feel if they get a prospect, they're going to be forced to play right away because they've got nothing else, and I still think they're going to feel that way at the end of this season. I think build up that offensive line, maybe try and find a couple of young receivers that you can bring along so that when you do get the QB in the future, that they've got a chance. But at this point in time, it doesn't appear the answer's on the roster. I personally don't believe it is. If there is an answer in next year's draft, as I say, unless it's an absolute can't miss situation like when Andrew Luck came out, or how it felt with Winston and Marriott, real top tier prospects, I think the Jets should stay well away. Just accept that this is a team in need of a major rebuild, not dissimilar to what the Browns are currently going through. I think they've been wise in the same manner in terms of not investing too heavily in the QB spot in the last couple of drafts to try and strengthen the overall roster. If you were to put even a highly touted rookie QB on this Jets roster as is, I think they're going to have a very difficult time, and you're just going to hinder their development and then set your franchise back even further. I believe this team needs to lay a foundation. I think we need to be looking at maybe 2-3 years down the line for a QB. So that's my assessment of it anyway. Maybe find a stopgap next year just to make things look a little bit better. Who knows who may be available. So there you have it. That's the New York Jets. I think one of the most difficult situations, the worst quarterback room in the league for my money, and the outlook does not look bright for this franchise going forward. As I say, let me know what you think. As always, we've got the comment section below. You can find us Cover Zero on Facebook, or get in touch with me via Twitter @Simon Conboy. I'd be more than happy to discuss this with anyone. If you got any theories as to what the Jets should look to do, any difference in opinion, always fun to discuss these things. Love talking ball. I'll do my best to get back in touch with each and every one of you. As always, if you enjoyed the show, I recommend like, share, subscribe, check out the Patreon, check out some more of the shows. It'd be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much for watching, guys. It's been a pleasure as always. Have a great evening, and go Bucks.